Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Gain Insight into All of Your Information. I'm Teresa Resick, Vice President of Market Intelligence here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. I'm pleased to say that Shiny Docs is the underwriter of today's webinar, and thank them very much for their support. And certainly thank you for taking the time to join us today. As we're getting started here, just want to offer a few pointers for participating in today's webinar. Look to the chat feature, and this is where we will share a link to access some really cool resources, and also for you to go in there and comment, ask your questions of the speakers throughout our time, all that kind of fun stuff. But go into chat right now and just let us know where you're calling from. It's always nice to see where in the world you are today with us. And as I said, do ask questions of the speakers as we go along. We have some time carved out at the end to take your questions, but feel free to put those into the chat feature or also Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those later in our webcast as we can. Also would greatly appreciate it if at the end of the webcast, if you would take a feedback survey. A link will open up when the event closes, but we'll also share that link so that you have access to the survey in case you have to duck out a few minutes early. I do value your feedback, and I certainly read every comment you put in there. So thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Learning Center page in just a few days. Now I'd like to introduce our host and MC for today's event. Kevin Crane is AIIM's content strategist, and he authors for AIIM, ebooks and infographics on a wide variety of intelligent information management and digital transformation topics. Kevin is the producer and host of AIIM On Air podcast, and that podcast has recently been named on Forrester's Top 100 Podcasts to Listen to. So I'm very pleased to turn things over to Kevin and have him begin our conversation today. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Teresa. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Teresa, for having me. We're here talking about getting insight from all your information. I want to talk about the all part. The amount of information that we must manage today is truly astounding. In my research, I'm always astounded at what I find. We create roughly 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. But when it comes to organizing enterprise organizations, the stat that surprises me most is that on average, enterprise organizations have 5 different distinct information repositories or content-based databases, often with years of legacy data that is packed away. And that's not counting all the many file shares and business applications and personal computer drives that contain often hidden or overlooked information. And that can be a big problem. According to our research, 49%, nearly 50% of the organizations that we talk to say that simply understanding and then integrating enterprise data and systems is their biggest information management challenge. But I don't know, I don't want to talk about all the things that are problematic. I think most organizations, most of us understand the problems that are created by information overload. The impacts are felt in everything that we do every day, whether that's difficulty finding the right information or managing and saving and protecting the growing quantities of sensitive data, or leveraging that information in ways that make a real difference. I think organizations struggle to keep up. And as a result, organizational performance is impeded by this ever-pressing data crush. 2/3 of office workers say that the volume of data that they must manage negatively affects their job. 70% of the AIIM members that we talk to say that getting the right information to the right person at the right time is really at the heart of their digital transformation challenge. So even though information overload is well known, it seems that most businesses really haven't found the right solutions to deal with it. And that's what we're here to talk about today: how to gain insight from all of your information, finding it, managing it, leveraging it. How do we do that? Traditional notions of enterprise content management essentially assumed that we could manage all of our information in one central place. But even the most modern content management systems can become islands of information, and in reality, really only represent a mere sliver of the amount of information that we must contend with every day. If we come to the realization, the acceptance that records are everywhere, the question then becomes, what do we do about it? And that's what we're here to talk about with Jason Cassidy. Jason is joining us again. Jason is the CEO of Shiny Docs and an expert in digital transformation. Jason and his team at Shiny Docs develop enterprise class information management solutions, and his folks have worked with some of the largest and most progressive organizations in the world, finding innovative ways to more optimally manage data and drive digital transformation. And he's here to tackle some of my questions and give us some perspective on how to battle information overload and begin to get more insight and more value from our enterprise information. So, Jason, welcome to the event today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here and then talk in front of this great audience. It is. I love that we're touching on these topics. We've had 7 years of study of identifying where is the information within the organizations, and it's exciting to tell people about what we found and what they can do about it.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, Jason, I want to talk about the all part. When we talk about gaining insight from all your information, what does all information mean to you?
So all information means everything that has business value. The thing that we tend to do with records is we have a very platonic notion of this is a record. For example, with a asset management company, we might say everything that comes from a control doc and is filled in and then goes in as an activity is a record, and none of the other information matters. And I've heard that quite a bit. And it's not that none of the information matters. It just means none of the information is important to the project I'm working on right now. And I appreciate that. But the issue that we've encountered more and more is that when litigation happens with organizations, when they have injuries in the field, when they do mergers and acquisitions, when they do divestures, what ends up happening is the platonic thing that we know are records all of a sudden are part of the story and not the entirety of the story. So when you go in to do any type of higher level business activity like a merger and acquisition or these types of activities, anytime you're supporting the new build of a giant asset, it really helps to loosen your thinking of what important data is to get the bigger picture, because then you can make better decisions. So think more programs, think bigger about what information is valuable to the business rather than which information is specifically within my purview for this particular project.
It occurs to me, I remember an interview I did for AIIM on Air a while back. I forget the lady's name, and forgive me. But it was with a county government. And the issue that she was describing was that they handle a lot of records in sort of the traditional way. They scan quite a bit of physical pages, but now their team and their department is being tasked with retaining and managing 911 audio calls to dispatch. And there was some confusion about what the best strategy for that was. Clearly, those were important records, entirely important. But how to handle them within the scope of information governance or records management was a little bit of a gray area for their team. What are the implications of these new kinds of information, coming on board, whether that's audio from a 911 call, maybe it's a body cam footage from a police officer, those kinds of new types of information. What's the implication of that being included in the all part of what we're talking about today?
I love those examples because the mismanagement of that information has obvious dire consequences. So in the event that you cannot recall body cam footage, in the event that you cannot recall the substance of a 911 call, that's could be life or death. It certainly could mean wrongful convictions, under convictions. It could mean, in the best case, inefficiencies. So I like when new problems arise like that, because what ends up happening is people generally fall into at least two camps. One of them is the ones going, well, we have to figure out how to put that into our records practice. And our records practice is rigorous or well-defined, or it's the way we've always done it, so let's get it in there. I'm more of a fan of saying, for a program associated with content that is valuable for the business, what is it that we can do right now to enrich this data and make it available to the business? And then what could we do the next day? What could we do the next day as a continuous program? And if you think about it as a continuous program of just enriching the data, make it more available to the business, you're going to make different decisions than, okay, I just got to get it into this spot in SharePoint where I keep all my records, or this spot in OpenText Content Suite where I keep all my records. Because even some of the ECM vendors might say, we don't want gigabyte media files in our system. You need to keep them somewhere else and then put physical asset records into the system. And it gets quite complicated when you have that fixed thinking of saying, we already have a solution for this and let's shoehorn this into the, whereas a company like ours, I'll take an example. Let's say, okay, we're going to pass it through a filter that gives you the full text of the conversations and automatically identifies who is saying which component of it. That might go into the enterprise content system. That will definitely go into your ability to search. And the asset itself will be secured and locked down as if it's on legal hold in perhaps even a file share, like some spot that easily manages petabytes of data. So that might be news to people on the call. It's like it's out of the box thinking. And that's exactly what we're talking about with all, is that you don't want to find out, what am I supposed to do that I've always done? It is, what can I do to serve the business and solve this problem?
Well, that gets to the heart of, I think, your philosophy and your approach at Shiny Docs, a more holistic approach. And in fact, we've just finished working together, AIM and Shiny Docs, and together writing a new ebook on this topic, exploring the advantages of using a more holistic approach and doing a complete inventory of my information. Can you describe how that's done? What are the advantages of stopping and doing a complete inventory of my information sphere? If I'm a SharePoint shop, for example, what am I missing? Tell me more about how that works and why it's important.
Yeah, certainly. The first step, and this is something that was really never before available, and this is why it's somewhat new to this audience and others. The idea that when you ask the question to an organization, well, how much data do you have? And when I say an organization, it is these municipalities, it's oil and gas companies and others that we're going into and saying, how much data do you think you have? And they'll often say, we think we have about 200 terabytes or 300 terabytes. And once we do the initial metadata crawl across the SharePoints, the file shares, the email, across other structured systems like Maximo, for example, we generally find that they have close to double the information that they thought they had, just in terms of data volume, which is interesting. We ask them, how much data duplication do you think they have? And they say, oh, it's got to be at least 20% duplicate. And we found as much as 80% duplication across hundreds of terabytes of information. That's interesting. So when I went back and I talked to Cheryl McKinnon, who we're quite close with, I think everybody on the call hopefully is familiar with Cheryl. She's awesome in this industry. And asked, like, where did the statistics that we're seeing coming out of these industry organizations come from? And she said it comes from CIO questionnaires that we send out. We ask them, how much data duplication do they have? How much content do they have? And then they fill in the blanks. And what's cool is when they first engage with Shiny Docs, they kind of parrot back those same answers that they did in the questionnaire. Well, we think we have 25% data, and we think we have 200 terabytes, and we think there's 5% records. And when we actually do the content analysis across all the data, which happens quite quickly, and we'll show, I got a couple of slides to show that later, we find out really what's there. It is always dramatically different from what they think. It blows people's minds, and they're like, oh, wow, now I really truly understand the scope of the data, and I can make better decisions about how much are records, where are records. Quite often it might be less than what you think because of duplication, for example.
80%. That is amazing. So 80% duplicate information that I am managing, and it's costing me, and I'm dealing with it every day. But you're saying that assessments of that are just a guess.
Right, right
in many
now.
cases, right?
Yeah, because the old tooling before we got into the massively scalable way of doing this, the the old tooling used to be file directory listings, or when live reports or third-party reports in something like your SharePoint, which tend to not be comprehensive, and they tend to not combine very well with other data sources. So that's why I say, for the first time, when we're talking about these new scalable systems like our Shiny Docs cognitive analytics, the ability to homogeneously be able to see this across all of the data for the first time, know where every duplicate is, whether it's on SharePoint, whether it's in your outbox and email, whether it's on a file share. All of a sudden, now it is the complete picture, which is often, I'm not going to say it's 100 times different than what a CIO thinks, but it's usually off by a factor of 2 to 4 in one direction or another, which is
Significantly.
substantial. Absolutely.
All right, well, how do I do that? Now, if I'm just looking at my enterprise content management system, I understand I could dig into that and understand what it contains. But when we start talking about the fact that records are everywhere, file shares here, there, depending on how you even define what a record should be and can be, how do I then start assessing all of those other parts of the information ecosphere that might be overlooked in a more constrained framework?
Yeah, from a data science point of view, the good news is if you've already been doing several years of records management, what's very cool is that establishes some guidelines for you for meta information, what you think might be out there in the rest of the world, a taxonomy by which you might start considering the rest of the information. It also gives exemplars, stuff that has been given a little bit more consideration, that then a system can go off and say, I want to find everything else that is like this document that we consider to be a record, like this document that we have declared as definitely sensitive across the whole organization. What's fun, well, fun for me, being an information professional, is identifying, I'll say, where are the truly sensitive information in your enterprise content management system. And then we will crawl across the rest of the file shares and we'll show them every copy that's just out there freely available to everybody on the file share that they have locked down very tightly inside of their ECM. And I go, this is the reason why we have colonial pipeline problems. This is the reason why we have data breaches, because if you don't take a comprehensive view, how can you manage what has yet to be measured completely, for real, not the guess, but actually measured by a system that you can interrogate?
That's super powerful. I think, how could you not move forward without that knowledge? If you're a decision maker, and especially an IT focused decision maker in a large enterprise organization, it would seem to me that that would be the first thing that I would need to understand: exactly what information I have, exactly what risk it might represent, exactly what opportunity it might represent, exactly what kind of liability it might have in terms of process performance. And yet I'm still struggling a little bit with how I do it. You mentioned crawling, and I suppose there are people that are much more in tune with this that understand it better than I do. But what do you mean by that? Is this a manual assessment, something that folks are physically going around and digging into systems and making physical notes, or is it something driven by machine learning and AI? Can you describe that process?
Yeah, certainly. So it's as much fun to show as it is to tell. The the first thing that the success that we really have, and sorry to jump around here, if we see my screen, the success that we initially have is generally related to the fact that we create the report, the actual performance report that shows what your data is and what it is doing right now, that allows you a physical asset that you can take to your leadership and say, this is how your information is currently relating to your business. And it is the first time ever, quite for the companies that we deal with, that their executives have ever seen the exhaustive, full view of where all this information is. In the best case for us as information professionals, we will have an executive. For example, we have a couple of projects right now where it is driven by the executive's behavior, because during audits, people found tons of personally identifiable information and information that by law must be looked after in a different way, just out there on file shares. And they're like, how did this happen? We have an ECM program. How did all this other stuff get out there? And I believe the answer, there's 100 answers, but I'm gonna take one that I see quite often. It is that when we are given a project to do, whenever we're given any task, quite often as a species, as people, what we'll do is we'll identify what we can do, and then we'll demonize everything else that we can't do. So we'll say, well, it's kind of like dehumanizing. It's if the opposing counsel, you don't want to go and shake hands. If somebody's suing you, you don't go out for beers with them and get to know them, because now they're human. Now you can't be enemies. And I think we do that with our data. What we do is we say the records, these types of records that I've defined are the project thing that I need to do. And so everything else must not be important. But all of a sudden now when the CEO or the board comes back and says, hey, guess what? We just got our butts kicked in an audit. You guys got to fix this. Tell me about how ECM programs can fix this. It puts the records manager in a position that's on the wrong side of those executives. What I'm suggesting is here's a tactic to get really on the right side of them, to say, hey, guess what? There is a way of going about understanding all this information. I'm going to give you understanding and control. So the first step is the visualization. And this happens quite quickly. For our customers, for 100 terabytes up to over a petabyte, within 6 weeks, they get the full visual landscape, even geolocated in some cases, where this is the critical information that is out there. What's shocking to most organizations is the amount of duplication, the amount of redundant, obsolete, and trivial information that is just automatically found, and the minimal amount of information that might be in a SharePoint or another ECM system compared to emails and file shares, and the redundancy that happens between those, like saying, hey, all these documents we think were locked down in SharePoint, guess what? There's 50 copies of them out on the file share. So I'll pause there. That's step one, but happy to dig in on that because we can move.
I guess I'm still a little unclear about how I do it. I need a process that uncovers what I don't know.
That's right.
It uncovers things that I don't know about. So is this like a piece of software I put on my network? How does it know to look at places that I may not even be aware of, or that people have, or that we have that are sort of off the book? I'm unclear about how to get the holistic view of all my information.
I like that, Kevin. So, and this is something we're 22 minutes in, and we didn't really talk about what Shiny Docs is, and thank you for sussing that out. It is a software company. This is software that you install around or near. If your content is in the cloud, you will install an agent in the cloud, or if your content is on-prem, you install an agent on-prem. The analytics engine that we provide will get installed wherever you think is appropriate from a security standpoint and an operational standpoint. So either on-prem or in the cloud, your choice, or hybrid. And those agents then go off and digest this information wherever it is, meaning it will literally connect to a file share and then crank through all the data to find all the metadata associated with the content. It grabs the full text of the content to provide further analytics, and it grabs and it also grabs a unique identifier, which we can call it a hash of that content. So then we can compare it to all the other content out there. The software just does it. And it comes back and says, here's where all your data is, without passion or prejudice. It hasn't gone into the long tail of let's do classifications or anything like that yet. But now you get a true landscape of, hey, look, here's 3% in SharePoint, 60% on a file share, 40% in email, and then the rest is in other. Is the initial thing that we get in that first 6 weeks. Software only, not too much thought needed to be done by the organization itself.
And right there, then I can start addressing that, I don't know, 80% of redundant, obsolete, trivial information. I can right off the bat start addressing that.
Correct.
Beyond that step, then, what's been your experience with your clients now that they're armed with this information? Maybe they've dealt with the rot.
Yeah,
what are some of the things that they have done beyond that then to improve the performance of the organization, given that knowledge about what all their information is, where it resides, and potentially what it represents?
yeah. There's two things that happen generally very quickly after that, and I say within the first 3 months after start. And that is we start using the cognitive tooling because we know the full text, because we have access to doing very cool things like clustering information. What that means is I can do a search just like a Google search out on the web. This is a Google search against a search against your data. And now you can say, hey, this file here, this is one of the important ones. This is a work order. This is whatever that is. Right click on it, and it'll show you all the other ones that are substantially similar to it using artificial intelligence on the spot. It's very cool. That allows you to identify what I'll call the low-hanging fruit, which is all the documents that tend to cluster together, every recall notice, every purchase order, every invoice, these types of things. It hasn't yet extracted out all the metadata and done other things yet, but it's at least we get a classification of the content. And what is becoming more and more popular now that we're into the third year of this with our customers, as we start launching this, the customers will put the search in front of their end users right away. I can search for every word on every page across a petabyte of information, and I already have a classification for the content, or at least for a portion of the most important pieces or the most clustery pieces. That's high value. And we've seen supply chain times like engineers having to go and find that right PDF document that describes that right pump in that right building. We've seen their search times go from 40 hours down to a couple minutes, because instead of having to go to the file share and click through documents and then trying their open text system and then phoning people and saying, do you have in your email that vendor piece of information? We've already got it. We found it. And it's all permission search. So there's no elevation of privilege. If you could see it before, now you can see it now, only find it like that. So that's step two. It doesn't solve the problem completely because there's a long tail. This is our search interface. I hope it looks simple, because it is. You type in what you want. Of course, there's advanced search, which allows you to pick from which classification, what metadata that you'd like. This is an example of the data visualization report that you take to your executives, that you take to your lines of business. You give them the search in this report saying, this is your data. The first time ever you've seen your content.
So I can see how this helps greatly with the find part. I mentioned earlier, information, you've got to be able to find it, you've got to be able to manage it, and you've got to be able to leverage it. Tell me a little bit more about the managing part. I fear that we are seeing only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cybersecurity threats that are afoot. Hackers are becoming ever more increasingly sophisticated. Even the most tech savvy organizations fall prey. So how does this process help me better manage and secure my information?
Yeah, historically, we've always leaned on what I'm going to call prescriptive standards, which means we'll say, do you have this feature? Can I do check-in and check-out? Can I set a classification? Can I dispose of content? And that's good, because you need to have those technologies. And the beauty is everything does it right now. Our tooling, SharePoint, every other ECM, everybody does it. It's table stakes. What's missing, and what I think we should all be demanding, is the performance standards, saying, I don't want to just manage a terabyte of data. I got 100 terabytes. I don't want to just manage these set of records. I think that we deserve to be able to secure, manage, understand, and action anything that has business value across the organization, whether it's the 100 gigabytes that got Colonial Pipeline in trouble, or obviously there's been 3 or 4 data breaches since then, meatpacking and other things.
It's impossible to keep up. There'll be one today, right?
Exactly. So when you can search and find, and you know all this information, our tooling, or you could use an SI, because you can ask anything you want about your data. Show me all the content that relates to this particular area of business. We want to make sure that that is immutable and locked down. It's going to be on legal hold or for whatever reason. It's trivial once you know the exact information to then run our tooling to go off, even if it's in a file share, to go wind back everybody's write permissions to make sure that nobody can write to this anymore. Everybody can still find it, but now it's immutable. So that is an example of something you want to get rid of cyber, like these types of cyber attacks, crypto locker or ransomware, as we want to call it. If nobody can write anything except what they're exactly allowed to as discrete person by person, then those attacks go away because there's no writable footprint for them to go after. But the issue with IT staff, the issue with records managers is go, hey, that's above my pay grade to go and figure out all this information across the whole business. I'm going to focus on my thing, and that's it. But what I'm suggesting is the boards, the C-levels, and that are going to want you at some point to be a part of this front end of the business, the part that's going to make sure that the operations are safe, have integrity, and will not grind to a halt when 100 gigabytes of data gets encrypted. End users are going to want this. I guarantee you, once they start searching and they find stuff like that they were previously recreating, or in the worst case, going out and having to dig a hole and remeasure for millions of dollars because they couldn't find the drawing or the as-built, then your end users are definitely going to want this information.
We are speaking with Jason Cassidy. Jason is the CEO of Shiny Docs, and we're here talking about how to gain insight from all of your information. Jason, we've talked a little bit about the find part and the manage part. Now I'm very curious about the leverage part. How can this help me use data, use information in more profitable ways and really leverage that understanding and that knowledge in ways that give me a competitive advantage in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, like, for example, we meet with SAP and we meet with other industry leaders who have wonderful relationships with the types of companies that we would like to have. And their advice to us about how they sell is focus on the process exclusively because the data is just too hard. Make sure that the process itself is really well defined. For example, for supply chain, that the engineer has to magically go find the content and then they process the thing in the next step in Maximo or SAP or whatever. Because if you make the content success predicated on the implementing the process, then you'll never sell to the customer because they're never going to get that data right. And that actually makes me sad and breaks my brain. If literally we say, okay, it's okay that the engineer is taking 40 hours to find the document, at least they have a nice button to click on once they found the document to say it's ready for the next step in the workflow. And that's what we're getting when we just focus on process only. Process plus information is the efficiency that actually drives the right behaviors within the organization. It's the fact that, yes, something broke in the field. Yes, we need to find all the drawings. Yes, we need to find out if there's any equipment or parts in our inventory. How do we collect all that information? And the efficiency in doing that is, to me, the most important part. To somebody like SAP who looks after the process, it's not. They go, man, I don't want to play there because there be dragons there. And I'm saying, let's remove the dragons. And up here, I have some technical terms. They're cool. We'd be happy to talk to people, but these are the types of the long tail of things that we continuously do. And the outcomes themselves, the most important outcomes, are the fact that people will find the information faster. People will dispose of the information that they're supposed to. Because when you stand in front of the judge and they say, why couldn't you find the information? The last thing they want to hear is, oh, well, we implemented SharePoint, therefore we're good. They'll still ask the question, why couldn't you find the information to support this business practice, especially one that ends up in front of a court?
Well, Jason, we are joined by an audience of AIIM members, real world practitioners that are out there doing it every day. I want to get to everyone's questions here in a moment, but really, can you give us an example of a real world implementation that you feel has been particularly successful using this approach? How did it work for them, and what were the real world results?
Sure, and I put this up here and saying who's doing a good job of this. I say Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook, not because they're not because they're necessarily the organizations who treat us best. And I'm not talking about their service. I'm not talking about AWS. I'm not talking about Google Cloud. What I'm talking about is how they use your personal information, Kevin Crane's information, to drive their business. They know everything about your shopping experiences, what websites that you visit. They know they partner with credit card companies to see what you're buying, and they have this massive data graph of data points knowing a lot about you as a person. That is the exact technology that you need on your documents in order to connect that to the people, process, and information to drive your business itself. So the example that I'll give is I'll start off with a fairly straightforward one. A oil and gas company who has a legacy of file shares, information that has been scanned into their systems over and over again. And when we crawled their information, when we did an initial visualization, we showed that they literally had twice as much information as they thought. Cool, so far so good. It was determined that to find a particular type of document, and this is a measurement that they take at particular areas along their pipelines, to recreate them costs well over $1 million. I'm not going to say the exact number, but it's well over $1 million per test. And they had no automated way of finding those tests because they weren't in a records management system. It was hundreds of terabytes of data. How do you do that? Well, you do what Amazon's doing with your personal information. You do what Apple's doing with your personal information. You build a big graph of where all this content is. The meta knowledge, that's what Shiny Docs does. So we can search for every word everywhere it is. Even Google with the public web, you don't put your website on Google. Google comes and finds your website and has that meta relationship to it, so that if you're Kevin Crane is the right response, they'll give it to you. So with our system, with the combination of actually using image recognition across these documents to find which these particular tests are that the customer's looking for, we can quickly identify where all these tests are across their entire organization, including email, SharePoints, file shares, every source, so that when somebody says, I'm looking for it for this particular line, boom, it's already pre-calculated, there it is. That just saved them over $1 million for that one quick activity.
So the results for this oil and gas company was $1 million savings in what? Operating expense, or was that a revenue generating activity?
So everything that they try to do is like when you think of a company, whether it's a nuclear power plant making vibrating electrons, or an oil and gas company who's delivering fuel downstream, perhaps for making plastics or perhaps to fuel an automobile, all sorts of cool uses for that type of thing. For each of these companies, it is how to lower the costs associated with their assets. They must have their assets. You can't create electricity without some moving pieces. You got to buy these things. But if I can operate these assets for half the price, my profit goes up. That's their whole business. And it doesn't matter whether you're what it is that you're delivering. The whole idea is keep your costs down and keep your demand high for your asset that you're selling, your commodity perhaps that you're selling, and everything in between there is your profitability. So let's drive that profitability by finding efficiencies in this asset management. I don't think any other industry, if you step back and squint a little bit, every industry is exactly like that, because it's hard to find things. Like there are things out there that you can do to get a 10x on particular outcomes for industries where people are all of a sudden like, I never knew back in 1985 that I was going to walk around with one of these for the rest of my life, but here we are. So, but those transformations only come along every once in a while. Everything else is just finding efficiencies, and the most efficient organization will be the most profitable one, the one that's most likely to win.
Are there ways I can make new money? I understand saving money and building my profitability that way. What about using information in a more powerful and profitable ways to reach new markets, new customers? How can I achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where we're finding ourselves now that we're into year 3 with our customers. I'm not going to sell this up front as the outcome that you're going to drive in the first 3 months. What happens is once you mobilize your data, once you humanize your data, make it available for people through search and these types of things, And then the people in your organization who are running the spreadsheets right now, the data scientists who are looking for ways of doing predictive analytics, building the data lakes, doing the master data management, they've all been doing that with a limited sliver of content. Just the stuff that was in your SAP, just the stuff that was in your Maximo or your Salesforce. That's it. That's all they got. Now we're bringing them the other 99% of the data, and they love it. Because Kevin, what's the number one thing that you hear from data scientists when they come into an organization? The organization says, "Transform my business." The data scientists will then say, "I don't have enough data to do that. Give me more data." That's the number one complaint, and that's what we're focusing on. So I don't know how to make the next generation of automobile. I don't know how to make the next generation of nuclear power. I'm happy just giving people all of their data so that they can make those decisions and make those powerful advances on the front of their business.
We are speaking with Jason Cassidy from Shiny Docs. We will be getting to your questions here in just a moment, but Jason, before we do, one last question. Tell us a little more about Shiny Docs. What should we know? How do you help?
Yeah, so we really focus on software and strategy to supplement the program that you already have. There's nothing wrong with your SharePoint. There's nothing wrong with your OpenText. There's nothing wrong with your Documentum. The systems that you are using are working, but they come at it from a very prescriptive thing. We give you these features, and I'm sorry, customer, but if it doesn't work, it's kind of your fault because you didn't find a way of getting buy-in across the organization, or you didn't do the migration right, or whatever. So we put a layer on top of all that and say, let's completely reduce or eliminate the risk of the failure in the migration. Let's make sure we've vectored the exact correct information into something like an OpenText, rather than just isolating and saying, well, I know I can do this project, so I'm going to do it. So these are areas by which ultimately your expenses associated with those programs will definitely go down, because the exploration and the lack of confidence for organizations is where all the migration failures and where all of the lossiness exists. People just trying stuff to see if end users will adopt it. People just trying stuff to see whether or not we're going to get that desired legal outcome. But if you upfront understand all the data, you do some first data analytics, you enrich the information, you connect it to the assets, and all that's just done up front, either in the ECM, out in the file share and all that. Now you can make the exact right decisions for your data. And those experiments that you do with your users and your business now are the trivial things that you do at the end, instead of the scary thing that you try to do at the start to see if it works.
And I will remind our audience that Shiny Docs and AIIM have just recently worked together on a new ebook that explores these topics in more depth. I'm certain that you can find information about it here in the resources section. I don't believe it's quite out yet. We'll find out more from Teresa here in a moment, but do stay tuned and watch for that new ebook coming out in partnership with Shiny Docs. Now, Jason, I do want to give us time to get to some questions today. So at this point, I'd like to open it up and perhaps turn it back to Teresa so that we can start taking some questions from our audience today. Teresa, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And first of all, I just want to mention to folks that these links that you see up on the screen, they're in that resources link that I've been sharing out with you. So feel free to click that URL that I have. It'll open in a web page for you, and you can download all of these cool assets that Jason and his team have provided for you guys. So do take advantage of that. One of the questions we had coming in, and let me pull it back up in front of me here. Someone was asking, how do you distinguish, content management systems against knowledge management systems? Are there any KM tools that you might recommend?
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm going to be a little bit more generic and happy to, please connect with me one-on-one here with Jay Cassidy. I don't want to call out a particular vendor or that on this call, but I'm happy on one more intimate setting to get very specific. But the generic answer that I have is that we use the word knowledge management too early in the life cycle of of this enterprise content management or enterprise information management journey that we've taken. Knowledge, like knowing something, is, it's to me tightly coupled with understanding something. You can't, can you know it if you don't truly understand it? Knowledge is what happens when you take the data that you have and combine it with the other information and rules that are around you and within you in order to then drive good decision making. And the content systems that we use right now, and I'll say the SharePoints and others, don't do that by default. And in some cases, they don't do it at all unless you are willing to put in all the work and build the applications on top of it. So what I'm suggesting is by doing the continuous enrichment of this data, connecting it to your SAPs, to your Maximo information, by doing pre-calculation of all this content, applying things like sensitivity analysis, applying things like, let's find entity extraction, PII, everybody's names, all of a sudden, now you're combining it with the rules that you have. Now you're combining it with the assets in the greater organization. And that to me is knowledge, because that truly helps you with the decision making. It's like a bicycle for your brain. It allows you to go much faster with the content that you have. And then further analysis, taking that content and combining it with other technologies, which I'd be happy to discuss one-on-one. I certainly have lots of ideas on that for you.
Kevin had mentioned that an ebook is coming out, and David in the chat has been also saying it's coming out soon. And yes, honestly, it's coming out soon. We'll let you know when we do publish it. We're in the final home stretch of working on this ebook, and had the pleasure working with Kevin and Jason and his team for pulling this together for you, and looking forward to sharing that with everyone. So we will let you know when the ebook publishes, hopefully within the next few weeks. Another question that has come in, Jason, someone says that they need to start the process of cleaning up the shared drives to identify the records, move them into some type of system. Where do they start? Do you start with crawlers? Just some thoughts and suggestions to get people moving.
Yeah, for sure. So I will selfishly answer with what you would do with Shiny Docs. It's what we do first of all, obviously, is we want to assess like what your ultimate outcome is, and drive, what are you trying to do? Support litigation, you're trying to support asset management, and there's different ways of aligning with that, and that's fine. But working it backwards to be completely tactical, the thing that we do is we set up an analytics engine, and this analytics engine is a combination of large scale enterprise search with a layer of application on top that has these capabilities. I don't want to make a big deal out of AI. AI isn't everything, but it's part of it. And the most important component initially is just these agents that run near your file share. It doesn't have to run right on your file share, near your SharePoint. And they literally use the APIs, like they'll use CIFS and SMB to go connect to your file shares. They'll use the REST APIs to connect to SharePoint, and they pull down the information, just the meta information, just the full text of the content and duplicate information, and then the metadata information, create dates, modified dates, any custom columns, all that goes into the analytics engine, and you get that first visualization automatically. It's just built into the product. Here's where all your data is, here's where your duplication is, here's some personally identifiable information, here's stuff that hits our rot list right away. There's also kind of cool things like finding corporate unacceptable content, and I think we can all imagine what those things might be. I don't want to have to say it, but those are built into the product, so you can quickly identify, okay, this is what you've got. And then, as I showed in the slides, then there's a step 2, which is how to shop that to the organization, what tools you can give them, like enterprise search, in order to get their buy-in. That report that will go to your C-levels and executives to say, man, that is important data. That's the first time I've ever really seen my data, which then drives step 3, which is that long tail of, hey, let's really enrich the data to align it with the business. So I apologize, I gave a bigger answer. Let's just talk about 6 weeks. You visualize all the content, you get the initial classifications, and then you've got a cool report, and you've got the ability to search now so that you can drive that across the rest of the organization.
6 weeks. Jason, can you talk about any additional manpower that might be needed to pull this off, as in comparison to, say, a traditional ECM deployment, for example?
Yeah, I love that you used the word additional. It's almost like you said it on a tee for me, is that the way to make your life better is very seldom to add things. What you want to do is talk about what are we subtracting? Because say, for example, you're doing a records management program where you have 20 people manually going through documents and identifying what they are. Wouldn't it be better to have two operators of a tool that can do that instead? That's the type of thing. So for our typical customer, they will have two people that are guided by us, guided by our customer care representative, and then our customer success staff to make sure that they're moving towards their outcome. But they will have two staff that are just administrative types, data stewards, who operate the tooling to go off and find this information. The tool does it itself, and it's no longer a group of 20 or 30 people, often outsourced, who have to go and manually find the information, manually decide, is it this type of document or that type of document? This is something that the tool does automatically. So it's actually, it's quite often less than adding. Quite often it is a tenth of the workforce that would have been previously required to do this. And it just happens much faster because the tooling is doing it itself.
Yeah. It's one question that I feel I got to ask, because so many of our AIM members in the AIM community work in highly regulated industries. How do you do all of this when those regulations, the rules, compliance things, those compliance factors that have to be adhered to, when those things change so frequently? Your recommendations for dealing with that?
Yeah, the beauty of running a program instead of a project is it implies that the change is just continuous. Like myself, I'm part of the SC11 working group through Canadian Standards Council, working with ISO on ISO 15489 and others. And it's perfect the way it is. I like the document lifecycle as it's described. I like the metadata as it's described. So why doesn't all data have this? Well, I'm going to say that there's some standardization out there that's missing to get to the place where we have all of this available to us. So that's the approach that I take, and I want to work with AIM members. I want to work with you and Kevin and others to talk about at a higher level. Everything that we've been doing so far has been perfect, but at a scale that's not appropriate for the organization. So what I'm suggesting is we will work together to come up with standards that are very complementary to the massive data sets that we have now, that were never contemplated when those standards were put in place back in the early 2000s or before then. And that's our goal: modernize the standards, because nobody ever thought those 911 calls and every transcript and all this was going in, petabytes of content going into these programs. That was never considered in 1998 when people started really breaking ground on those working groups.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our webinar time here, and there's just a couple of things I just want to mention to those of you here before we wrap things up. Just wanted to mention, AIM's Certified Information Professional, our certification program that we have. And just this certification is dedicated to enhancing and promoting the profession of information management. We firmly believe that this is a profession. And so I encourage you to check out the CIP. And actually, it's a number of us here at AIM have earned this designation. And it's the breadth and experience that you bring to the work that you have been doing, and then also some, AIM, we're here to help educate you and help you learn. There's a variety of different assets that we have that can help you prep for taking this certification. But I encourage you to check out, aim.org/CIP and check out this certification program that we have. And so, since we are at the end of our webinar time, I just remind folks that this webcast has been recorded, and we'll send you a link to catch the replay. Also, download those resources. I've been sharing that link for you to do that. Please take our feedback survey. Very much want to thank our underwriter, Shiny Docs. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, Shiny Docs. I appreciate your support and your sponsorship. So as we do bring our time to a close today, I want to start first. Jason Cassidy of Shiny Docs. your closing thoughts or a key takeaway?
Yeah, I found more openness over the last year or so. Like obviously it's been a dark time for many, many people, but it has introduced an openness to try on some change. And I think we're all used to the idea that a lot of things change very quickly. So I believe the timing's right to just step back and look at our professions, look at how we can make ourselves more relevant to the business and more attractive to, as Kevin was talking about, the front end, the profit side of the business, and different techniques that we can use for that. I hope that people find that interesting, because there's never a better time than after a chaotic system like we've had over the last year to step back and reevaluate. And we hope to get a chance to work with all of you on that.
Thank you. And Kevin Crane from AIM, your closing thoughts from everything that we've been discussing today.
Well, I find this whole idea of understanding, discovering and understanding all of my information, what that represents to the organization in terms of risk and opportunity, to be a really powerful one, and one that we may have been overlooking if indeed we're finding 80% or whatever of information that is useless to us. So I think it's a very powerful tool for decision makers and organizations to use to really start transforming their organizations in ways that make a big difference. The question is, how do you do it? And so I'll just remind everybody that we do have an ebook coming out with Shiny Docs that explores the topic in a bit more detail, and just point everyone to the AIM on Air podcast, where we continue to have discussions like this about things that move the needle with digital transformation.
Well, everyone, this brings our webinar to a close today. I greatly appreciate your time and your attention. And thank you, Shiny Docs. Thank you, Jason and Kevin, for being here. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we'll see you with our next event. And have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.